When you hear the words Roman bath, what do you picture? Is it a scene of serene luxury, of opulent marble halls, the gentle lapping of pristine water, and senators quietly discussing philosophy in white togas? This is the image of Roman hygiene and sophistication we've been sold. An image of a civilization so advanced, they brought heated floors and public spa days to the masses 2,000 years before we rediscovered the concept. But what if that image is a lie? What if I told you that this temple of hygiene was, by our standards, spectacularly filthy? A place where the water was rarely changed, where thousands of unwashed bodies soaked together in a tepid soup, and where the cleansing process involved being scraped with a metal blade covered in your own and someone else's grime. The Roman Thermae, or public baths, were one of the greatest institutions of the ancient world. They were an engineering marvel, a social epicenter, and a brilliant tool of political propaganda. But they were also a paradox. They were the height of public luxury and simultaneously a breeding ground for disease. Today, we're stripping away the marble veneer. We will walk through the grandest bathhouses of the empire, from the changing rooms to the fiery furnaces beneath the floor. We'll uncover how this complex system actually worked, what Romans really did there all day, and ask the ultimate question: were the Roman baths a triumph of civilization, or the most luxurious public health hazard in history? This is the real, unvarnished story of luxury and hygiene in ancient Rome. Before we can step inside the bath, we have to understand how it was even possible. The story of the baths begins not with a building, but with a river, an artificial river built of stone that arched across the landscape. The Aqueduct. Rome was a thirsty city. By the height of the empire, over 1 million people were crammed into a dense urban sprawl. To sustain this population and to project an image of absolute power, Roman emperors undertook some of the most ambitious engineering projects in history. The aqueducts were their masterpiece. These weren't just pipes, they were monuments. The Pont de Gare in France, the Aqueduct of Segovia in Spain, these structures still stand today as a testament to their skill. They harnessed the simple power of gravity, meticulously calculating a gentle slope over dozens of miles to carry millions of gallons of fresh spring water into the city every single day. This abundance of water was, itself, a statement of luxury. While other civilizations struggled with wells and droughts, Rome had water to waste. It flowed into public fountains, decorated the villas of the rich, and most importantly, it fed the insatiable appetite of the public baths. Emperors knew that water was power. Providing it for free, or nearly free, was a political masterstroke. It was a tangible daily reminder of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, and the benefits of imperial rule. The baths were the ultimate expression of this hydraulic propaganda. They were a gift from the emperor to his people, a way of saying, look at the civilization I provide, look at how I care for you. This gift, however, came with an implicit social contract. The baths were more than just a place to get clean. They were the engine room of Roman society. So let's imagine it's 2 p.m. on a hot afternoon in the 2nd century AD. You are Marcus, a typical Roman citizen, and you've just finished your morning's work. The negotium, business, is done, and it's time for otium, leisure. There's only one place to go. You don't head to the most famous baths, like the colossal baths of Caracalla or Diocletian. Those are magnificent, like self-contained cities with libraries, gyms, and gardens. But today, you're just going to your local neighborhood Thermae. The entrance is grand, even for a smaller bath. You pay your fee at the door, a quadrans, the smallest coin in circulation. This is the truly revolutionary part. The baths were, for the most part, democratized. A laborer, a senator, a poet, and a soldier could all afford to enter. The price was kept deliberately low by the state. Your first stop is the apodyterium, the changing room, and it is chaos. This room is loud, echoing with the sound of men shouting, slapping and laughing. You find a small niche in the wall to store your tunic. There are no lockers, no keys. You either bring a slave to guard your clothes, or you risk it. Bathhouse thieves, or furores balnearii, were a notorious problem. Roman curse tablets have been found, begging the gods to strike down the man who stole a tunic. You strip bare. Complete nudity was the standard for men. Women often bathed in separate, smaller wings, or had different earlier hours. In some more scandalous periods or locations, mixed bathing did happen, but it was often frowned upon by moralists. Once undressed, you don't head for the water, you head for the gym. Attached to every bath complex was the Palaestra, an open-air exercise courtyard. Getting clean in Rome meant getting filthy first. The Palaestra is a hive of activity. You see men lifting primitive weights, others wrestling in the dust, and a group playing trigon, a frantic, fast-paced ball game. You join in, working up a deep, grimy sweat. The Roman concept of hygiene wasn't about preventing dirt, it was about the process of removing it. You had to earn your bath. After an hour, you are caked in sweat, dust and oil, which was often applied before exercise. Now, and only now, are you ready for the main event. You begin the balneae, the bathing circuit, a journey designed to shock and cleanse the body through extreme temperatures. Your first stop is the tepidarium, the warm room. The air here is humid and pleasantly warm, heated by the revolutionary technology beneath your feet. This room is the social antechamber. It's here to acclimate your body to the heat. But more importantly, it's where you meet your friends, exchange the day's gossip, and perhaps hear a poet reciting his latest terrible work. The philosopher Seneca, who lived above a bathhouse, complained endlessly of the deafening noise, the grunts of the weightlifters, the depilators' sharp cries, the sausage sellers bellowing. It was the social media timeline of the ancient world, and it was loud. After acclimatizing, you move into the inferno, the Caldarium. The Caldarium is a shock to the system. The air is intensely hot and thick with steam. This was the Roman sauna. The heat is so oppressive you can barely breathe. This room is deliberately designed to open every pore and produce a purifying sweat. In the corner, there might be a small pool of scalding hot water to soak in. But here, the central act of Roman hygiene takes place, and it doesn't involve soap. Soap, as we know it, was seen as a strange, barbaric custom of the Gauls. Romans used olive oil. You or your slave would rub high-quality, or if you were poor, rancid olive oil all over your body, coating the sweat and grime. Then comes the strigil. This is a curved metal scraper. You, or more likely, a slave you paid, would systematically scrape every inch of your body with this blade. The strigil would remove the oil, sweat, dead skin, and dirt, which would collect in the tool's curved groove as a thick, dark paste called glue. This paste was then flicked to the floor. Think about that. You are in a hot, crowded, steamy room. The floor is slick with the scraped-off glue of dozens of other men. This gunk was even considered valuable. It was sometimes collected and sold to women as a high-end, celebrity-endorsed facial cream, believing it contained the vigor of the athletes. After you've been thoroughly scraped, you are finally clean. But the ritual isn't over. You move, sweating and steaming, directly from the Caldarium to the final room, the Frigidarium. The Frigidarium was the polar opposite. It was a large, deep, unheated pool of cold water. The transition is a violent physiological shock, and that was the entire point. You leap into the icy water, your skin tingling, your pores slamming shut. It was seen as invigorating, a way to harden the body and soul. After this final plunge, you emerge, wrap yourself in a linen towel, and your bath is complete. You are clean, refreshed, and ready for dinner. The bathing process itself was just one part of the experience. The larger imperial thermae were not just baths, they were palaces of the people. The baths of Caracalla, for example, covered over 33 acres. The complex was so vast, it contained 2 full libraries, one for Greek texts, one for Latin. Art galleries filled with famous sculptures like the Farnese Hercules, sprawling gardens for strolling, and lecture halls for philosophers and politicians. You could buy snacks from vendors, get a depilation, where body hair was painfully plucked, or even conduct a business deal. Politicians canvassed for votes, generals planned campaigns, and merchants secured contracts, all from within the steamy confines of the tepidarium. For the average Roman living in a cramped, dark and noisy insular apartment building, the baths were their living room. It was where they went to be a Roman, to participate in the life of the city, and to feel, even if they were poor, a sense too of imperial grandeur. It was the great social equalizer, where all classes mixed in a way that was rare in the highly stratified Roman world. But this mixing of bodies, this grand public experiment, had a very dark, microscopic underbelly. Let's revisit our modern image of hygiene. When we think of a pool, we think of filtration and chlorine. The Romans had neither. The aqueducts provided a constant inflow of fresh water, which was a marvel. But the outflow was often slow, and the pools themselves were not drained and scrubbed daily. They were, in effect, massive shared bathtubs for an entire city. Pliny the Elder, a Roman author, described the water in some baths as filthy. We have to consider what was in that water. Thousands of people a day, caked in sweat and oil, would plunge into the Frigidarium. The scraping from the Strigil didn't happen in a sterile environment. It happened in the hot, wet Caldarium, and the grime was often just washed off in a pool. Worse, the baths were often used as public toilets. While latrines were available, not everyone bothered to leave the pool. People with open wounds, skin diseases, and internal infections were all soaking together. The Romans themselves knew it was dangerous. The physician Celsus warned against bathing with a fresh wound, as it almost certainly led to infection. Galen, the most famous doctor in the Roman world, wrote extensively about the health risks. Roman medical texts are filled with descriptions of diseases easily spread in water. Conjunctivitis, sticky eyes from the bath, fungal infections like ringworm, often called bath rash, and severe gastrointestinal diseases. Archaeologists have found evidence for dysentery, cholera, and typhoid parasites in the drains of ancient bathhouses. And remember the strigil? It was rarely, if ever, cleaned between uses. A bathhouse slave would scrape down a senator, then move to a soldier, then to you, using the same blade, potentially transferring all manners of skin infections and bacteria. So, while the idea of Roman hygiene was advanced, the daily ritual, the focus on the body, the practice was a biological nightmare. They had mastered the large-scale engineering of water movement, but had zero understanding of the germ theory of disease. The very place they went to become clean was quite possibly one of the most dangerous and disease-ridden locations in the entire empire.
And deadly.
We cannot leave the baths, however, without paying respect to the single greatest piece of technology that made it all possible, the hypocaust. How did the Romans heat an entire room, not just the water, but the floors and walls, to the temperature of a modern sauna? The answer lay underground. The Caldarium and tepidarium were built on a raised floor. This floor, suspensurae, was held up by a forest of short, 2-foot-high brick pillars called pilae. This created a large, open space beneath the bathers. Nearby, massive wood-fired furnaces, prefurnia, were tended 24/7 by slaves. The searing hot air and smoke from these furnaces were not vented out of a chimney. They were channeled directly into this underground space. The hot gas would flow through the labyrinth of pillars, heating the marble floor above until it was almost too hot to walk on. Romans wore thick wooden sandals, or soli. The heat didn't stop there. The walls of the Caldarium were built with hollow bricks, tubuli, which acted as flues, drawing the hot air up through the walls of the room before it finally escaped through an opening in the roof. The hypocaust was, in effect, the world's first large-scale indirect radiant heating system. It was incredibly sophisticated, but also incredibly demanding. The fuel required to run a single large thermae for one day was staggering. Forests were leveled to feed the furnaces, and the logistics of supplying this much wood were a constant, massive undertaking. It was a system of brilliant, unsustainable luxury. And like the aqueducts that fed it, its reliance on a stable and functioning empire would ultimately be its doom. The Roman baths were so much more than a place to wash. They were the social, political, and cultural heart of the Roman world. They were an architectural marvel, an engineering triumph, and a statement of imperial power that defined what it meant to be Roman for centuries. But they were also a perfect metaphor for the empire itself, opulent and magnificent on the surface, yet sustained by a brutal, unseen engine of labor and plagued by internal dangers they couldn't or wouldn't see. So what happened?
What changed?
As the Roman Empire began to crumble in the 4th and 5th centuries AD, its priorities changed. Barbarian invasions, civil wars, and economic collapse meant the state could no longer afford the staggering cost of maintaining the aqueducts and feeding the furnaces. The Goths, besieging Rome, famously cut the aqueducts in 537 AD. The flow of water that had been the city's lifeblood for 800 years was severed. The great baths, the palaces of the people, ran dry. Without water, they were just empty, cavernous shells. They were stripped of their marble, their sculptures, and their metals. They were filled in, built over, or simply left to decay, their complex systems of hypocausts and pools buried under the earth. The bathing culture of the West vanished. It would be over 1,000 years before public hygiene and luxury would return on such a massive scale. The legacy of the Thermae lived on in the Turkish hammam, but in Europe, the great Roman bath became a distant memory, a lost world of luxury and filth, buried beneath the streets of a new, darker age. The baths show us a civilization that, in its ambition, mirrored our own. They achieved a level of public, communal luxury that we still struggle to replicate. But they also remind us that all systems, no matter how grand, have a breaking point. Their technology was brilliant, but their understanding of the very hygiene they championed was fatally flawed. So, the next time you step into a hot shower or a chlorinated pool, remember the Romans. Remember the ingenuity it took to heat a room with the floor, and remember the grim, oily paste scraped off with a strigil. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Roman baths. If you enjoy this kind of historical investigation, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It truly helps our channel explore more of these lost worlds. And I have to ask, would you have used a shared strigil? Or would you have been the one Roman complaining about the noise with Seneca? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious.